really the opportunity to live and work in a country, to learn new cultures, to learn new languages, to build lasting memories with people you meet along the way. By the end of the experience, you've gained a better perspective of who you are and what you want to become.
Welcome to the show, Canadians Work and Travel Abroad, a podcast by Go International Work and Travel Providers about all things to do with working and traveling overseas. I'm Tamsin Flaxton, host of the show and founder of Go International. I'm also an avid international traveler. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Canadians Work and Travel Abroad. I'm really excited today to be joined by a guest from the Canadian government. It's Sean Lynch, and he is a member of the International Experience Canada team. Sean, welcome to the show.
Tamsin, it's great to see you again, and thank you very much for inviting me onto the podcast.
Yeah. So for our listeners, I just want to start with a little note, and I am going to read this, but it's just a note to say that this podcast episode is an interview with a representative of the International Experience Canada program, a Canadian Government of Canada initiative, and Go International is a partner of this program. The Government of Canada encourages everyone to research the health and admissibility requirements of the country they wish to visit, including any remaining requirements related to COVID-19 pandemic. And also, just to note, as Go International only records episodes of Canadians Work and Travel Abroad in English, no French equivalent of this interview is available in audio format, but the transcript saved to our website can be translated into any language online. So with that little sort of advanced disclaimer, I guess we can jump into our show today. Sean, maybe we could start with just having you tell everyone, what's your role at the IEC and how long have you worked there?
Sure. So I've been with International Experience Canada for 7 years now, working on various files, and for the last few years, working with organizations such as your own, managing some key partnerships with Canadian organizations that support youth work and travel programs, which is similar to the mandate of our program. Before IEC, I was also with Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, working on settlement program issues for newcomers. And I've also had the opportunity to work in the health and environment portfolios in the federal government.
I love how careers in the government go. You get so many experiences.
It is amazing. Yeah. It's a microcosm of so many different wonderful experiences.
So the IEC, I know it, but I think for the listener's sake, could you explain exactly what does IEC stand for? What is it? What is the initiative? Some people call it a program. Some people call it an initiative. How does it work?
Yeah, happy to do so. So International Experience Canada is part of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. So we're the arm of government that deals with temporary and permanent migration. And International Experience Canada, or IEC, is Canada's flagship youth mobility program. And it offers Canadian and foreign national youth the opportunity to work and travel in another country for a defined period. The program began really in the 1950s with a few agreements, mainly with European countries. It was kind of in that time where there was a lot of reconciliation and relationship rebuilding after the Second World War, and so we started from that source. We slowly built up new arrangements. We had a really big push in the early 2000s to add new and more diverse relationships. So, and that continues to this day. Right now we're at 37 country partners. But at its simplest, so the Canadian government and the governments of the other countries and territories have agreed to allow each other's populations to obtain a work permit or visa to explore a new country and its culture and, all of the other elements of international travel while being legally able to work. So each agreement with each of, Canada's partners is a little different in terms of how long you can stay, the age limits and the types of eligible work. But generally it's open to 18 to 35-year-olds and allows for stays of up to 2 years. And it allows for slightly different work permit experiences. So the most popular of our categories, if you will, is the working holiday program. So that's an open work permit, and it allows you to generally work where you want and for as long you want, as long as you want, in the country of choice within the maximum stay allowed. But there are also two other categories that are more employer specific. So what we term young professionals is where you've left the academic stream, but you're entering into the phase of your career and you want to season that career with international experience. So you can find an employer that will hire you in, your industry or your métier, for that experience. And there's also international co-op, which is for those who are still in the post-secondary stream, their educational career, and either they have a cooperative opportunity, they want to work integrated experience that will basically add to their academic credentials. That's another option under the program. So the great thing about IUC is it operates as a reciprocal opportunity. So we offer the youth a chance to gain international experience for foreign nationals from our country partners and Canadians to those country partners.
Yeah. And, you mentioned that it started in the 50s and it's really accelerated in terms of number of country opportunities since the early 2000s. And I had the opportunity to go when I was a university student. I took a summer between, I think it was second and third year of my undergraduate. Well, I'm going to age myself here, but that was a long time ago. That was in the 80s. And I think at that time, there were only like a handful of countries I could have gone to. And the one everybody was going to at the time was Australia. And I went to Australia and I worked at Ayers Rock in the middle of Simpson Desert. And it was an incredible way to spend a summer between years of university. But I think if I had known of the opportunities that exist today, like if those were open to me, like Japan and Korea and Costa Rica, there's so many great opportunities now.
Yeah. And as I'll mention later on in our discussion, we're trying to find more opportunities and trying to diversify even more.
Yeah. So what would you say are the benefits to Canada, first of all, in this initiative or program? Why would Canada even want to participate in this? And what are the benefits to the participants from Canada?
Yeah. So starting with the participants, it's really an unparalleled opportunity to live and work in another country and earn money while you're doing it. You can tour, you can have an academic exchange, you can do many things along the spectrum of international experience. But really, the opportunity to live and work in a country, to learn new cultures, to learn new languages, to build lasting memories with people you meet along the way. By the end of the experience, you've gained a better perspective of who you are and what you want to become. You learn to become more flexible and adaptable, and to think differently. And last but not least, at the individual level, there's the opportunity to be able to put on your resume that you've had international work experience, and that can have a real cachet with many employers. The benefits for Canada, really are to equip our youth with the experience they need to be able to participate in the economy and to grow as citizens as well. And for foreign national youth, it's an opportunity to explore Canada, work and contribute to our economy, perhaps, want to come back in some form. But it also is a bilateral relations booster, where you have memories of Canada, hopefully good memories of Canada, and that has a lasting impact in terms of our international relations.
Yeah, absolutely. They often say, like, it's pretty hard to imagine going to war against a country that you worked and traveled in at some time in your life, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you start to build those kind of personal relationships through this experience, I notice that every country I've traveled to in the world, my ears perk up when I hear that country in the news.
Yeah.
I'm much more connected now to the countries I've been to, having had that kind of close-up experience. And I like what you said.
You have that point in time reflection on having been there, knowing the streets, knowing the regions, knowing the cities, knowing the people, and that makes, as you say, the news much more real, but also the need for us to get along, as countries and societies, that much more real as well.
Yeah. And you no longer see these people as just a country on a map, but you see faces and names when you hear the country in the news, someone you worked with or someone you traveled with. Yeah. And the boosting of the resume. I think you said getting that international work experience. I know I had an interview with a law firm when I graduated from university, and the only reason they gave me the interview was they said they were curious about my job experiences in Switzerland and Australia, and they thought that was unique and they wanted to bring me in. But that gave me the foot in the door for the interview, and from there I had to kind of make it on my own. But
and we've heard many of those kinds of stories before too, where that's the hook that gets you that interview or gets you the job.
So, what type of work experiences are Canadians allowed to do when they go abroad on an IEC facilitated work permit? Are there any restrictions on the type of work they can do, or is it completely open?
I mean, it depends again on the category, but really the sky's the limit. I mean, you can kind of choose your own path depending on what the countries offer you, what kind of categories, how long you can stay, what kind of jobs are available there. But really, the sky's the limit. I mean, as mentioned, the IEC pathways cover the working holiday side. But also these two more specific categories that allow you to have a more in-depth experience in your chosen field. By far, the most popular option is obviously the working holiday because it's the most flexible. In most cases, an open work permit gives the participant the freedom to stay in one or more jobs over the defined period they're allowed to stay in the country. So you can basically take a job, decide you want to travel to within the country or an adjacent country, come back to that country, work some more, earn some more money, make more connections. That's the way it can go, So, the majority of youth, I think, will find jobs in places like hospitality, hotels, resorts, restaurants. But it doesn't mean that we haven't seen, participants in more professional fields. We've seen youth, work in science and tech, in business and marketing, in health and childcare, agriculture, and even the arts and culture field.
Yeah, and that's true. I've seen that both ways, right? Canadians going abroad, the ones that we send abroad, and also Canadians coming in here to Canada. Some of the country agreements, and I'm sure you're going to explain this, some of them allow them to stay up to 2 years. And for an employer in today's labor market, someone willing to stay 2 years is actually a long contract for us, as employers. So, there's no hesitancy for many employers to hire someone on a 2-year work permit for something that might be a very career or professional position. A lot of people and getting jobs in marketing and in office administration positions, not what we would have traditionally thought of as sort of seasonal jobs.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's really expanded, and during COVID, we had an opportunity to examine some of these, some of the jobs that people were having because we were able to get more information from some of the youth. And it was amazing to see the range of jobs that were available and being taken by youth on the inbound side. And I would argue on the outbound side too.
Can you give us an idea about how many Canadians are taking up this opportunity and going abroad on one of the IEC category programs?
Yeah. So, pre-COVID, and we have to preface a lot of stuff with pre-COVID, we were seeing between 18 and 20,000 youth go abroad through the pathways that we've negotiated with our country partners. Now, during the pandemic, of course, that trickled down to nothing because of all of the public health and travel restrictions that were imposed. As things hopefully continue to normalize, IEC now hopes that we're going to be able to see that pre-COVID level or even better going forward. There is a pent-up demand, I think, for a lot of youth to be able to have that experience. And so we're hoping to see that uptick. Right.
Yeah. I mean, some of the countries have only just opened. So I think a lot of Canadians have been waiting for those foreign countries to open their borders and to allow Canadians to come back. Can Canadians go abroad on this initiative more than once? And what are the rules around that?
Yeah. So, for foreign nationals, the general rule for most of the agreements is twice per lifetime to come to Canada. A Canadian going out, can basically plan on visiting any number of the countries that we have agreements with. So, most youth mobility arrangements between Canada and the other countries actually allow for, twice per lifetime participation for each country. So what that practically means is you could go to Australia, or you could, and then decide to go to Italy, and then decide, after your time there is done, to apply to go to another country. It really provides between that 18 to 35 year limit. It provides a lot of opportunity for Canadians to explore different regions of the world, really. So, the great thing is a Canadian can choose to work and travel up to these limits between the ages of 35, or 18 to 35.
Yeah, technically someone could leave, apply on their 18th birthday, leave as soon as they're ready, and then not come back until they're 36 years old and work and travel all over the world. Why does the IRC work with recognized organizations like Go International? I know because I know a lot of people probably ask, why does the IRCC have this relationship with organizations, private organizations, and not-for-profits? So what's the benefit to Canada? And
I think there are multiple benefits. I mean, it's understood that as a government-run program, we can't provide the individualized support for those youth who may need some help in planning their international experience. So we do a lot of work to promote and support international experience pathways. But these partnerships with a key set of Canadian youth expert organizations are one way of us trying to support youth in realizing their international experience. So the value of the partnerships that we term recognized organizations, or ROs, so these are the strategic partnerships we have with expert organizations like yours, you really provide the support youth need in terms of helping to plan an international experience. You help expand the reach of the program, through other promotional channels and, contact with youth that we may not be able to have very easily. And then I can't understate the value of the real-time intelligence that our recognized organization partners provide to us on how the arrangements, some of the IEC pathways are actually functioning. So are they functioning as intended? Are they efficient from, the immigration standpoint? And whether it be like flagging to us that there's a problem with our system, or flagging to us that there are barriers, probably unintended barriers to Canadian youth being able to fully realize an international experience abroad, that's a real help to us. And finally, recognized organizations provide the kind of feeder stock for, recruiting youth who've been on an international experience to tell us about that experience. And, we have a YouTube channel where we have some testimonial videos to kind of illustrate, both what a youth can do when they go abroad, but how it changes them, how it benefits them. And that's been a great source of support for us to be able to, interview some of your past clients on their experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And I must comment on how responsive your team has been when we do raise barriers, as you said, and they're always unintended. I mean, I think the right hand often doesn't know what the left hand is doing in a lot of governments because, departments are big and sometimes these are cross-department issues. But, there might be a program set up in a country, but another department of that country doesn't even know all the details of the program. And so you've been wonderful about sort of addressing those on the political level when we needed to have them addressed and help our clients to achieve their goals. So thanks for that. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
So you've been around this program a lot. What do you see as the most popular destinations for Canadians going abroad to work and travel, and why would you say that is?
Well, I mean, there's definitely, the big 5 or 6, right? The countries that Canada is drawn to because of perhaps cultural or linguistic ties, historical ties, and speaking of countries like the UK, Ireland, France, Australia, New Zealand, we were seeing pre-COVID, a lot more traction from what we consider maybe non-traditional destinations or destinations that didn't have quite as many people interested, like Japan, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, Germany, places where, the reality is you have to learn the language to be able to adapt to the work culture. I mean, these are all very, well-developed, internationalized countries, and English and French are spoken widely in many of them. But you still have to have that linguistic and cultural adaptation that's a bit bigger than the old, historical country-tied countries like UK and France.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say we see the same trends. When you mentioned Japan, that was one that came to my mind in terms of what I see from the staff in our office who are dealing with participants from Canada on a regular basis, and they're fielding a lot of questions. Japan comes up a lot. But there's also interest in new and emerging programs as well, and opportunities. I mean, like Costa Rica, we're seeing more and more interest in Canadians wanting to go to somewhere, because it's Latin America, but it's also perceived as sort of safe, and which I guess would be a rationale for one of the reasons why that's one of the Latin American countries that you've signed an agreement with. But I'm curious, over the last 10 years, you said you've signed quite a lot of new agreements. What was the reason for wanting to sign so many? And do you have any plans to continue to expand? And how much can you share with us about that?
Yeah, I think historically, it's always been seen as an important bilateral relations sweetener, and so I think there was an effort in the early 2000s to really expand the reach of the program. And IEC, we do have a strategy in place to try to diversify and expand the number of youth mobility arrangements we have. But we also have to ensure, and I think you alluded to this, in terms of the safety, the economic opportunities abroad, and that sort of thing. There has to be, benefit to Canada and to Canadians. So, IRCC is constantly reviewing the current set of relationships to try to improve them. And we're in negotiations with countries on, adding to that list of available countries where we have this reciprocal opportunity.
Are there any regions of the world where you've got to focus on right now in terms of growth?
Yes. I think it's, if you look at the map of the, countries we deal with, it is by and large very Eurocentric. That's understandable from a certain standpoint, but, puzzling from another standpoint. So obviously other continents that we don't have as much presence on, you alluded to Central and South America. Right now, we only have active partnerships with Costa Rica and Chile, but hoping for more there. Africa would be a wonderful continent to be able to add countries for, and obviously South and Southeast Asia. Those are the growth areas. We already have a lot of European support, strong Asian support as well, and obviously Australia and New Zealand, two very popular areas and ones that are really, as hungry for youth and labor market support as we are. So, it's a combination, but it's also a process. We have to make sure that, that question, what's in it for Canada, what's in it for Canadians, is being considered when we enter into new arrangements.
So it sounds like a complex process because there's so many things to balance. How much work goes into these agreements? I don't think a lot of Canadians understand what goes on behind the scenes to create these opportunities for youth to travel abroad. I think they think, oh, well, why doesn't Canada just sign an agreement with Mexico or sign an agreement with, Argentina, because I want to go there. But I'm sure there's a lot in the process that we don't see. So without getting into too much, detail, but, how much work is involved in it, and how long would you say it takes in terms of time to negotiate a bilateral agreement? And I'm sure these
are complex issues, complex, negotiations, with countries who have different motivations. Sometimes they align, sometimes they don't with ours. But first and foremost, the government of Canada and the other national governments have to carefully negotiate and review the terms of new or renewed agreements to make sure that they benefit youth and the economy. The agreements often involve complex diplomatic and international negotiations, and sometimes it takes years to complete because they require numerous stages between the government of Canada and a foreign country or territory. Sometimes up to the point where a treaty has to be signed, or the addition of an IEC pathway abroad has to be enshrined in legislation. But once we do have the agreement, the work doesn't stop. There's still the need to continue to liaise with the foreign government partners to ensure that things are running smoothly for Canadian participants and for foreign nationals as well. We obviously manage the immigration process on the inbound side for the foreign nationals coming in to the program. And as mentioned before, we're all constantly trying to find ways to better promote the pathway so that Canadian youth can make that choice.
And I guess you rely on the foreign governments to give you the statistics about number of Canadians going abroad because they're managing the immigration side on their end, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's a good point because, it's not one cell, that's created through these negotiations. The foreign national youth use our immigration process to come to Canada using our admissibility rules. And then, a Canadian, by contrast, has to apply through the process of the other country. And so, for privacy reasons, for their own administrative reasons, we don't often see that data except in the aggregate because they'll send us information on how many youth have actually accessed the equivalent permit.
Do you have any interesting or remarkable stories of participants from Canada or coming into Canada from your time at IEC that you can share?
I mean, I kind of struggle with this question because there's so many. There's so many stories that we've heard, some of which we've profiled on our YouTube channel and or through other testimonials. We're constantly hearing amazing stories of what youth do with the opportunity. And we've profiled some of them, but there are many other examples. We've had occasion to see indigenous to indigenous youth exploring the other indigenous culture through job exchanges. We've seen youth who've farmed in New Zealand and Australia. We've seen youth working on high tech and drone technology and other really fascinating things through either a kind of a work term or an international co-op during their studies. But I want to point out that the job itself that a Canadian youth gets is almost secondary to the excitement that they show when they're asked about their experience. It's clear that the experience changes them on so many levels, and their outlook on life and their career and personal choices are enriched by the experience. So, we've even had some former participants actually be hired by the program as what we term youth ambassadors, to be able to demonstrate, to other youth, how you can go about an international experience and what benefits as a result.
So what trends have you seen in the last few years in terms of Canadians? I think kind of touched on that when we talked about where they're going, but any other trends in the...
I mean, overarchingly, I guess the big trend we can't ignore is COVID-19. The past couple of years, slowly emerging from this period where there was an absolute collapse of youth mobility and travel due to the pandemic. So that's the 2022 year that we're seeing so far is a vast improvement from the earlier stages of the pandemic. By and large, conditions in Canada in terms of COVID-19, a lot of the rules and restrictions have been relaxed. We've seen a mirrored effect in other countries, but every country is a little bit different, and most of the countries that we partner with have opened up their borders to youth to work and travel again. We're only slowly seeing a recovery, both from the inbound side, and we're kind of still waiting to hear through the exchange of stats from the other countries how well things are going now for Canadians outbound.
One thing we've noticed is, I think, Canada and Ireland, I don't know if you increased the quota a number of years ago, but all of a sudden there were a lot more Irish in Canada everywhere. Mm-hmm. A lot of them come and get jobs in ski resorts, and they love Vancouver, where our headquarters are, so we see a lot of them. And I'm wondering if that connection with the Irish is now what's driving the interest in Canadians to go to Ireland, because we're seeing a lot more people contacting us about work and travel in Ireland than we've seen in the last, pre-COVID.
Yeah, and it's so interesting when we do get the chance to deep dive into some of the trends and reasons why. I mean, we could point to the fact that the Celtic Tiger days in Ireland of the early 2000s kind of collapsed. And then, that coupled with an increase in quota might have accounted for you seeing a lot more Irish. Well, now, Ireland's economy is resurgent again. Yeah. Those opportunities exist. There is, I think it's fair to say, a pent-up demand for Canadian youth to have that experience. They've been deprived for 3 years. And, we've counseled them to plan now, travel later for so long that I think now they're ready to go.
Right. Yeah. And then, of course, we've got this issue in Ireland of, especially in Dublin, not all over Ireland, but the problem of housing being so hard to find, even for the Irish. So it's about getting it all, the timing all right. When do you want to go? When are the borders open? And is it, the right time to go to that destination, given what's going on economically and in the housing market? So, yeah.
And that's why I think it's so important for youth to plan. And, we have access to so much information now about another country, and translation services are instantaneous, and you can get a flavor for what the country conditions are at the time through a variety of sources. And, that can influence your decision on which country to choose when you're looking at the spread of IEC countries we have arrangements with.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a great tip, is, looking at the research the IEC has done. And then obviously the organizations like ours, Go International, we do a lot of research ourselves, but we're talking to partner organizations on the ground in those countries, daily. So we know what's the current real situation on the ground in terms of people being able to find jobs, find accommodation, travel. So the combination gives you a really good picture of, is this the right time to go to this destination for what I want to do?
Yeah. And some people are interested in or able to self-direct on that, but having an organization like yours who are looking out for those types of trends and, also the other needs of a youth is valuable as well.
So what other tips would you give someone who's interested in working and traveling abroad?
I mean, I think we've discussed some of them already. The first thing I'd say is, while COVID-19 is, we're hoping, becoming a manageable public health issue, we still have to be vigilant, and I really would counsel youth planning on undertaking a youth or an international exchange or international experience to look at the COVID-19 restrictions and the vaccine requirements in the other country before they book the ticket. The last thing you'd want is to try to arrive in a country and then be denied entry because you haven't paid attention to those rules that may exist in other countries. We can't apply our own norms and rules to the decisions of another country if they're facing a different public health crisis than we are at the time. I think in general, doing your own research, figuring out what it is you want to do, looking at job banks, looking at areas that other youth congregate and have success in finding employment in, considering using a recognized organization if you need that level of support. Your organization and others have affiliates in the other countries that can provide that intelligence, but also the orientation, and even an emergency situation can be a source of some support. So there's definitely that route as well. In general, it's be informed, have fun with this, look at the opportunities that are out there. We have a lot of reliable information from the Government of Canada's web resources like travel.gc.ca, which can describe some of the security conditions, health conditions in a given country. We have our own website that has a profile page for each of our country partners that gives you some tips and some, just some cultural points that you might want to know about before you apply. And then, of course, that also includes a link to the immigration service of that country so you can start, building that application to go abroad. It's just, research the conditions of entry in the country, its job market, and the other work and travel requirements that may apply in those countries. I guess, for instance, some countries require proof of funds. So they know that you can survive for a time in the country before you find a job. And there are other requirements of that nature. Sometimes you have to check in at an interior ministry office at an appointed time just to extend your stay or make sure that you're registered. So it's just being informed about those kinds of things makes your life a lot simpler later on. And mentioned again, support services are available. for a fee, often with the recognized organizations. So, as a start, I'd strongly consider suggest that you visit our website at canada.ca/IEC. As mentioned, we have a lot of information about our country partners, a lot of information about the process, and, it also includes links to some of our recognized organization partners. So I just really encourage people to live their dream and find, a way to go abroad. The IEC pathway is built for you. You just have to access it. And I think, the challenges and paperwork will fade away given the benefits that you'll actually receive from an international experience.
All great advice. And what we'll do is there'll be these links that you just mentioned. We'll make sure they are in the description of this podcast. So we'll be sharing those with everyone. Sean, you talk so passionately about going abroad. Have you had an experience of working overseas yourself?
The question I wasn't looking forward to. Like so many people my age, I never took part in IEC when I was youth. I didn't know it existed. Yeah. I didn't know that there were pathways to be able to do these types of things. I did, at different points, try to join, development programs like Canada World Youth and CUSO. Unfortunately, was screened out of those programs. And so, my experience is more personal. Obviously, several, rite of passage backing experiences in Europe. Yeah. Did an extended trip in India and South Asia. And, I also got a chance to be a delegate at a Commonwealth Youth Conference in Guyana, which gave me the opportunity to see that part of South America, which was really fascinating. But I keep on, advocating at the office to say that we really should have another, tranche of the program for mature young at hearts like me. But so far I've been shot down. So, but I will say 18 to 35 is pretty generous. And, I would really encourage young people to try it.
Yeah, a lot of people, when I tell them you can go up to the age of the 35 and they're in their 30s, like, really? I'm still considered a youth?
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're right. For the young at heart, there should be one for the youth and one for the young at heart.
There really should. Yeah. So we'll work on that.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's really just been a pleasure to catch up and to get this opportunity to, dive into this information a little more deeply and share it with our listeners. So again, everyone, this was Sean Lynch from the IEC, part of the Canadian government. Thank you, Sean, for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's been a great experience.
Well, that's all for this episode of Canadians Work and Travel Abroad. I'm Tamsin Plaxton, and thanks for joining us. We would love to hear from you. So if you have feedback or ideas of other topics you would like us to cover in new episodes, please contact us. Our email address is programs, PROGRAMS, programs@gointernational.ca. And if you want to learn more about the programs we currently offer, please visit our website, www.gointernational.ca. And in order to help us find more Canadians and share this information, please like and review this podcast. We want to get the word out. Thanks so much.